you noticed how rare it is now to end up somewhere by accident? Not lost exactly, just somewhere unexpected. A cafe you didn't know existed, a street you've never walked down before, a small shop you only noticed because something in the window caught your eye, a park, a park that wasn't the destination but somehow became part of the day. It used to happen all the time, not because people were more adventurous, not because life was slower. It was simply easier to drift. You'd leave the house for one thing, and somehow the day would gather a few other things along the way. You might take a different street home. You might stop somewhere because it looked interesting. You might notice a sign, follow a curiosity, and end up spending half an hour somewhere you never intended to be. Nothing dramatic happened, but something happened. And lately, I've been wondering where that experience went. A few weeks ago, I was walking through an area I'd been to many times before. I had somewhere to be. I knew exactly how long it would take to get there, exactly which route I would take, exactly where I would turn. My phone could have guided me there with my eyes closed. And somewhere along the walk, I realized I wasn't really walking. I was traveling. There is a difference. Walking used to involve noticing things. Traveling is often just moving efficiently from one point to another. The route becomes an obstacle between you and your destination. The journey becomes something to complete. And I think that's happened to more of our lives than we realize. Not just our walks, our days. When I was younger, boredom played a much larger role in ordinary life. Not exciting boredom, not meaningful boredom, just ordinary boredom. Waiting for someone, sitting on a train, walking through a shopping center, standing around with nothing particular to do. At the time, it felt inconvenient, but boredom had a strange side effect. It made you available to your surroundings. You noticed things, you looked around, you followed thoughts that arrived uninvited. You paid attention to details simply because there wasn't much else competing for your attention. And sometimes that attention led somewhere unexpected. A conversation, a place, a new interest, a memory that stayed with you for years, not because you were searching for it, because you weren't. I think wandering requires a certain amount of openness, not a personality type, not a lifestyle, just a willingness to leave a little space in the day for something unplanned. And that's become surprisingly difficult. Most of us carry maps now, not the folded paper maps, maps that know where you are, maps that know where we're going, maps that tell us the fastest route and the exact arrival time, which is useful, well, genuinely useful. Nobody misses driving in circles looking for an address. But something interesting happens when uncertainty disappears completely. So do many of the small discoveries that used to live inside it. You don't take the wrong turn anymore, which means you rarely find the interesting street that was one turn away from where you intended to be. I remember browsing without searching. That's another thing that seems to have quietly faded. You would walk into a library and have no particular book in mind. You'd wander through shelves. You'd pick something up because the cover looked interesting. You would discover things by proximity. One book leading to another, one subject leading to another, one curiosity opening the door to a second curiosity. Now we often arrive already knowing what we're looking for. We search, we locate, we retrieve, and then we leave. Efficient, successful, and somehow slightly different. Because discovery feels different when it arrives before the journey begins. The same thing happened to shopping, and not just shopping. Errands, weekends, entire afternoons. There was a time when people would go into town without a detailed plan. They'd wander through a few shops, look at things they weren't intending to buy, run into someone unexpectedly, sit somewhere for a coffee, let the day unfold. Sometimes nothing memorable happened, but sometimes something did. And nobody knew in advance which kind of day it would be. That uncertainty was part of the experience. Now it's surprisingly common to know exactly where you're going before you leave the house, exactly what you're buying, exactly where you will park, exactly how long it will take. The uncertainty has been removed. So has some of the possibility. One of the strangest examples is travel. People still travel, obviously, maybe even more than ever. But even while visiting entirely new places, many of us move through them with remarkable precision. Restaurants chosen beforehand, routes planned beforehand, reviews read beforehand, photos viewed beforehand. By the time we arrive somewhere new, part of the experience has already happened online. We aren't discovering, we are confirming. Again, this isn't necessarily bad. It prevents disappointment, it saves time, but it also changes the relationship. A place becomes less mysterious when you've already seen it 100 times on a screen. I sometimes think wandering depends on not knowing, not knowing what was around the corner, not knowing what would happen next, not knowing exactly how the day would unfold. And maybe we've become less comfortable with that. Not because we're fearful, but because we're efficient. We've become incredibly good at removing friction from everyday life. The problem is that wandering was made of friction. It lived inside delays, detours, mistakes, missed turns, unexpected pauses. The very thing we've spent years learning how to eliminate. And yet, the desire hasn't disappeared. I don't think that's why people still take long walks with no destination, where they browse bookshops they don't need anything from, where they drive scenic routes, why they stare out train windows even when there's nothing remarkable outside. Part of us still seems drawn toward experiences that don't have a clear objective, experiences that aren't trying to accomplish anything, experiences that simply allow us to be somewhere, to notice, to drift. Maybe that's what wandering was always about. Not getting lost, not adventure, not nostalgia, just making room for the unexpected, making room for the possibility that something interesting might happen if we stop directing every moment of our lives. A thought, a place, a conversation, a memory, a feeling, something we couldn't have planned because planning was never the point. I don't think wandering has disappeared completely. I think it's waiting, waiting in the small decisions we still make every day. The longer route home, the unfamiliar street, the shop we almost walk past, the walk we take without a destination, the afternoon we leave slightly unplanned. Those opportunities still exist, maybe fewer than before, yes, maybe harder to notice, but they're still there. And perhaps that's why wandering still feels so good when it happens. Because for a little while, we're no longer trying to get somewhere. We're simply allowing ourselves to be on the way. This is Quiet Echoes. If you're new here, welcome. Stay as long as you like. I'll see you in the next one.